Madam President, Mr. Vice President, colleagues and friends. It is my honour to introduce Professor Deirdre Madden. Many of us know her, but she's a distinguished legal scholar specialising in healthcare law and ethics. As a Professor of Law at University College Cork, she has significantly influenced national policy and healthcare regulation through her extensive contributions to advisory committees, expert groups, and regulatory bodies. Her research and publications focus on medical law, bioethics, and patient safety, and she's authored several books that are quite influential, including Medicine, Ethics in the Law, and Medical Law. Professor Madden has provided expert advice to the European Commission, the Irish government, and many international institutions. She has served as the Deputy Chair of the Board of the HSE and Chair of its Safety and Quality Committee. In recognition of her outstanding contributions, she was elected member to the Royal Irish Academy in 2020. She's also held visiting professorships in the UK, the US, and Australia, and her expertise is widely sought in academic, policy, and media circles. Her dedication to the advancing healthcare aligns with the legacy of Richard Carmichael, about who the lecture is titled, who is himself a pioneering Irish surgeon, medical reformer, and past president of our college. We are privileged to have Professor Madden here today to share her insights. I invite you to give a round of applause for Professor Madden, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Ridgway. That was a very kind introduction, and to Professor McNamara for your invitation to speak to you on the occasion of the 32nd Carmichael Lecture. It's truly an honour. I'd also like to thank Aoife Mahan for her kindness and help over the last few months. It's been really greatly appreciated. So I must admit I didn't know anything about Richard Carmichael when I received the invitation, but on a little bit of investigation, I found out he was the son of a solicitor and is described as an educator, reformer, and advocate. So I kind of feel a natural kinship with him, and I'm really delighted to be speaking at this event today. We all know that healthcare professionals and healthcare systems are facing pressures and challenges of huge global proportions: brutal conflict, the climate crisis, workforce shortages, health inequities, to name just a few. There's also much to be excited about when we look at advances in medical research, the application of new technology and robotics, genetics, genomics, the potential beneficial impact of AI in healthcare. I'm not going to talk about any of those things because in the midst of all that excitement, when I received the invitation to speak to you today, the words truth and trust immediately came to mind, because these have been themes that have been a constant thread throughout my career. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But first, I'm sometimes asked how I found myself working in this symbiotic relationship between medicine, ethics, and the law for more than 30 years now. So I'm just going to share a little bit about my background and interest in medical law, because I think it informs my approach to my work and why I think these themes are so important. My career choice started with my father, who was and still is my greatest role model. He was born in 1928 in a humble background in St. John's Square in Limerick, and raised in a family comprised of his mother, who became a widow at a young age, with 6 surviving sons, 2 others having died in childhood. He told us about 4 of his brothers sleeping top to toe in one bed, walking to school in hand-me-down shoes with the holes stuffed with newspaper, and his mother slaving hard trying to feed her growing boys. But what always struck me about his stories of his childhood was that despite the undoubted poverty of his surroundings, he always spoke warmly about the support of his community and how neighbours looked out for each other, the love of his family, and how education changed his life. He was educated by way of scholarship to both secondary school and UCC, where he studied philosophy and logic. He qualified as a teacher and worked for his whole life in Presentation Brothers College, a boys' secondary school in Cork. When he took up the job, he was asked to teach several subjects, including mathematics, which became, along with my mother, Munster rugby, classical music, and red wine, one of the great loves of his life. He also became an author, and if you went to school in Ireland in the 70s or 80s, you may well remember with some dread the Holland and Madden maths textbooks that all schools used at that time, and into which he poured his love for mathematics as well as his passion for education. Having a degree in philosophy gave my dad an enthusiasm, a language, and a patience for engaging with argumentative teenagers, not only in the classroom, but also in the family home where I grew up with my equally feisty brothers and sisters. Coincidentally, when I watched the brilliant lecture given on this occasion last year by Fergal Keane, he mentioned having gone to school in Pres and being particularly impacted by a weekly class in philosophy. I suspect, but I should fact check this, that he might have been taught by my father, as his speech about humanity, community, and the power and necessity of hope certainly reminded me of my dad, who led me to explore the boundaries of my undeveloped opinions, always encouraged me to think independently, and fostered in me a strong instinct for social justice, equality, and public service. So growing up with a father who loved to debate and played devil's advocate undoubtedly influenced the direction I took in my own education and career. More importantly, however, my mother and father's work ethic, integrity, and kindness have been an inspiration to me all my life, and I hope I've passed these values on to my own 4 children. As well as the philosophical nature of conversations with my dad, I was always attracted to the study of law by the similarities between the study of formal logic within mathematics and law, both of which deal with concepts expressed using formal logical systems and a formal language. I think I inherited an appreciation of the beauty of mathematics, which was derived from its abstractness, purity, simplicity, depth, and orderliness. And I saw the same at law, which may seem strange, but at its core, it's the way in which democratic societies agree to organize themselves. There is, or should be, a logic, a simplicity, and an orderliness to this too. The precision of detail required in the drafting of contracts, wills, and trusts is a rational precision. The skill of barristers in planning, strategizing, and advocating on behalf of their clients is a rational skill. The talent expected of judges in crafting coherent findings of fact and conclusions of law is a rational talent, and their ability to separate dispassionately and without bias the kernel of argument from the rhetoric of adversarial presentation so as to render judgments that are justified under the law is a rational ability. Rationality and logical reasoning are not all the law should be, however. In fact, Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes, who sat on the US Supreme Court for over 30 years, famously wrote in 1880, "The life of the law has not been logic, it has been experience." This phrase became the central truth of American legal thought. It became a statement of the very bone and sinew of the law, and at least one American law school literally carved it in stone on the entrance to its building. There are different ways of interpreting this statement. A favorable one is that this was a battle cry that law must not become out of touch with reality. It counsels judges to consider real-world consequences and the justice of the result when deciding cases. Indeed, President Obama, when nominating Sonia Sotomayor to the Supreme Court, equated Holmesian experience with a common touch and a sense of compassion, an understanding of how the world works and how ordinary people live. This seems to me to be an especially ironic interpretation, given Judge Holmes's notorious lack of compassion for ordinary people, as demonstrated in a letter he wrote in 1915, in which he says, and I quote, "Doesn't this squashy sentimentality about human life make you puke. Judge Holmes wanted to divorce law from all concepts of morality and ethics, and in fact, he read his belief in eugenics into the US Constitution, writing the decision in Buck versus Bell in 1927, which upheld legislation allowing the forced sterilization of a young woman called Carrie Buck, who was aged 18, on the grounds that she was feeble-minded and had a mental age of 9. It was argued that Carrie represented a genetic threat to society, as did her mother, and the baby Carrie had conceived as a result of rape. Judge Holmes held that the public welfare called for the state not to be swamped with incompetence. He said, "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough." I don't agree with Judge Holmes on any of this. I think squashy sentimentality, or the values of empathy, kindness, and compassion, are essential in society, in medical practice, and in our personal lives. There is sound evidence that caring makes a difference to patient experience, patient outcomes, patient safety, staff well-being, employee engagement, organizational performance. This is borne out by many accounts of patient experience in which they've stressed the importance of these values of care and compassion, what might be called emotional labor, demonstrating how interpersonal skills are essential to good medical practice. By comparison with the structure of law, which has been historically based on the logical application of long-established legal principles and precedents to factual nuances, I was drawn to a completely different area of law by my master's degree. My research topic was how Irish law should deal with surrogacy, a new and exciting area of law which had no applicable legal principles or precedents at that time. But I was fascinated by the intersection and the relationship between advances in reproductive technology, ethical principles of respect for autonomy and dignity, and legal concepts relating to parenthood, family law norms, and the constitutional right to have a family. I went on to qualify and practice briefly as a barrister, but the love of research and perhaps an inherited gene for teaching brought me back to academia to pursue a PhD and career in that intersection of medicine, ethics, and law. Bioethics for me is a fascinating open meeting ground for different disciplines to have discourses about questions raised by advances in medicine, science, and biotechnology. Ethicists talk about values, norms, behaviors, and they challenge us to think in a different way. I've had the privilege of being appointed to many multidisciplinary committees over the years, and what I've learned is that although each discipline has its own embedded culture, principles, and understandings, we have an obligation to collaborate and reach a consensus that we all believe is in the interests of patients and the wider community. So this requires us to listen and understand how the principles to which we're wedded from the educational and professional backgrounds in which we've been immersed need to have the flexibility to bend and shape around the real experiences of patients, practitioners, and the public. Lawyers are expected to bring to these discussions clarity, certainty, precision of thought and language. We're trained to think about and work with definitions, rules, and precedents, even if some of these are archaic and appear nonsensical to the outside observer. One small example of this is the concept of ownership of the human body. The questions we might ask are, do I own my body? Is it mine or is it me? Are there property rights in relation to the body or its parts if separated from the body? If they're mine, can I sell them? Our instinctive answer might be, of course we own our bodies, but it's not always clear what this means. It's not the same ownership I enjoy with regards to my house, my car, my mobile phone, but it's not entirely different either. Such subtle conceptual difficulties did not really trouble the law until recent times, when advances in biotechnology, genetic engineering, biobanking forced courts and legislatures to consider whether a body part separated from a living body, or frozen reproductive tissue, or immortal cell lines are to be regulated, and how. Slavery and servility were historically accepted by many cultures throughout the world. Slaves did not own their own bodies, nor did they possess property rights. Only with the liberal revolution did the idea that all human beings are equal and deserve the same consideration and respect begin to be accepted by political institutions. In the 17th century, when civil and political rights began to appear, the philosopher John Locke wrote, "Every man has a property in his own person." But that was not a statement of the law, as there was a long tradition and common law that a dead person cannot own the property of their body once deceased. For any Latin scholars here, the legal description is that the body is res nullius, a thing belonging to no one. This principle was developed in the days of grave robbing. The so-called Burke and Hare murders in Edinburgh revealed how the destitute, who were killed for medical profit, entered the supply chain of anatomists in Scotland. This and other scandals resulted in the medical profession successfully lobbying for a better and more plentiful legal mechanism of supply, but one that was still based on class inequalities. The Anatomy Act of 1832 permitted the poorest in society to become the staple of dissection tables, supplied by asylums, infirmaries, workhouses, and street deaths, amongst the homeless, friendless, and nameless of society. Key aspects of this act remained in force in England until 2004, a remarkable 172 years. There's a quote from an Australian case which describes the relationship between law and medicine as law marches with medicine, but it's in the rear and limping a little. Although we've come a long way, perhaps the law will always be limping in some respects because of the speed at which medical science advances, but judges can also be innovative and forward-thinking. And this can be seen in an English case involving this legal principle of no ownership in a human body, in which two men stole anatomical specimens from the Royal College of Surgeons in London to use them to make casts for modelling of sculptures. When charged with theft, they quite reasonably argued that they could not be convicted of stealing something which is not capable of being owned. The court found a way of upholding the ancient precedent, but cleverly departed from it, to hold that as the college had applied skill and technique to the cadavers to make them usable for educational purposes, this application of skill had converted them into something else, something of use, something of value, and therefore something that could be owned and stolen. So this is a good illustration of how the discipline of law must follow its own set of rules and principles, but also an example of judges having to consider real-world consequences and the justice of the result when deciding cases. So now that I've explained my fascination with medical law and ethics, I want to turn to the theme of trust and truth. Being a member of regulatory bodies and statutory boards over many years has undoubtedly taught me a lot about patient safety, clinical governance, risk management, and politics, both national and medical. However, one of the most important insights I've had in my work comes from the power of listening to people talk about their lived experience of receiving and providing healthcare. The finest doctors I've met have been calm and wise GPs who've treated 3 or 4 generations of the same family and understand the social context and background of their patients. Oncologists who've asked gently how much information their patients want to know about the likely trajectory of their disease. A palliative care consultant who sat in easy, peaceful silence, holding the hand of a patient who accepted the inevitability of her death. A psychiatrist who gives hope to a parent when others do not. They've all been skilled, safe, knowledgeable professionals, but more than that, they made a difference because they demonstrated empathy. They told the truth and their patients trusted them. Some of the values I keep returning to during my career are the importance of truth and empathy and the trust that flows from that. So I want to return to squashy sentimentality for a few minutes. Multiple studies identify open and honest communication, empathy, and respect as the most important aspects of care that patients value. I've heard patients describe the experience of not being listened to, being ignored, or being fobbed off. When someone's experiences are not heard, it undermines the likelihood that they will expect a therapeutic response to their future vulnerabilities, and trust in the relationship is damaged as a result. Stuart Ablon, professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School, says empathy is the most powerful human regulator we have. As a health professional, your words, your tone, facial expression, eye contact, body language can help regulate the person you're providing care to. If they know that you are truly trying to understand their perspective, their concern, what's hard for them, they will be able to communicate better, to listen, and to trust you. A paper in the New England Journal of Medicine talks about this concept as not only asking patients what's the matter, but also what matters to you. For many patients, their understanding and expectation of what a good doctor is not just about proficiency at addressing the clinical details of the patient's condition. What matters to a patient is that she matters to her doctor. It's about her doctor seeing her as an individual and taking the time to learn what's truly important to her. Dr. Deirdre Madden, president of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, says that asking this question signals to the person in the hospital bed, the exam room, the nursing home, or hospice, your goal is my goal. That's a strong statement of alliance. It's a powerful way to build trust, and it can profoundly shape a patient's experience of care. There are common themes in what matters to most of us. We want to be comfortable. We don't want to be in pain. We want to be close to those we care about. We want to spend time on things that give us joy, and we want to be told the truth. Truth-telling can be challenging if the truth is going to be difficult to hear or cause huge distress. And sometimes doctors instinctively want to protect patients from the cruel realities of devastating illness. However, truth beats protection in most circumstances, and it's necessary to enable patients to decide who they can believe, on what issues, and how to assess who's competent or honest. Gill argues that the conceptual framework of trust is comprised of communication, truthful information, autonomy, alternatives, and no guarantee. In other words, tell me the truth and let me choose. I might trust you. I don't deny for a minute the real challenges of working in healthcare. I'm not a medical doctor, but I've been in the company of many brilliant doctors throughout my professional life. I fully acknowledge how difficult, exhausting, and sometimes demoralizing day-to-day clinical practice can be for many healthcare practitioners. I listened to doctors and nurses during the COVID pandemic talk about moral injury. Fergal Keane, in fact, described this as the incremental wearing away of the human spirit in the face of witnessing the relentless pain of others and feeling that whatever you do will be inadequate to relieve their suffering. I know it's much easier to be kind when you're not being pulled in 100 directions at once, when your computer is not slow and doesn't need restarting twice a day, when you're relying on antiquated IT and paper records, or when you're not having to tell people that the waiting list for surgery is unconscionably long. I understand that every healthcare professional also has their own life and personal issues to deal with. So it's not easy, and everyone's doing their best. But as Maya Angelou, American poet and activist, said, at the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did. They'll remember how you made them feel. Trust is the bedrock of a relationship between patient and doctor, but patients can and should only trust those who are trustworthy. This is true not only of an individual patient-doctor relationship, but also in terms of trust in institutions of power. In deciding how and where to place trust, and despite the wonders of the internet, patients can sometimes be defeated by lack of evidence, lack of time, lack of expertise to assess the evidence. There are some available responses to these challenges by ensuring the provision to patients of all the available information in a way they can understand and with time given to facilitate that understanding. And that's what the ethical and legal requirements of informed consent impose. And that's a useful and an important safeguard, but it's not by itself a sufficient guarantee that trust will be properly placed. And unfortunately, it's not always seen as having any significance in practice other than getting the patient's signature on a form. Public attention, often influenced by the media and politicians, is largely directed to instances of justified mistrust. However, the truth behind these so-called scandals is not always clear and can be manipulated. This can lead to what Honora O'Neill describes as unnecessary anxiety for the needlessly mistrusting, and grief and difficulties for the needlessly mistrusted. These worries make it difficult to live one's life in a modern world in which medicine, science, and technology provide such important benefits. There are always institutions that don't work as well as they should, and unfortunately, individuals who do not live up to professional standards. These damage public trust and have sometimes precipitated legislative reaction in the form of increased regulation, which is not always sound, measured, or proportionate. Over the course of my career, I've seen many obligations imposed by new legislation in healthcare to increase and demonstrate truthfulness and trustworthiness. For example, the new legislative requirement for open disclosure following a patient safety incident, and the establishment of oversight mechanisms and regulatory bodies which are mandated to serve the public interest. Professionalism is regarded as an important element of the curriculum in medical education, and ethical obligations have been strengthened in guidance documents to which professionals must adhere. Although all of these are important, they will not be effective without the ongoing commitment of healthcare professionals working in partnership with those to whom they provide care, whose knowledge, wisdom, and experience is invaluable at every level of the healthcare system. To conclude, the world has become very complex, scary, and difficult to navigate for many people, and truth is not always apparent, given the levels of disinformation endlessly available through social media, and sometimes from political figures whose vaccine skepticism, blame-mongering, endorsement of conspiracy theories has put public health in jeopardy. Trust is a complex construct. It's context-specific and critical to the success of healthcare. Laws, policies, guidelines, and rules may help in some respects, but most of us who seek medical treatment are not thinking about our legal rights. And even if we have researched and read everything we can find about our condition and its treatment, at the end of the day, we're placing our trust in the person who we hope will take good care of us. I believe the essence of trust is truth, empathy, and respect, and it is the foundation of excellence in healthcare. Thank you very much.
As is customary, we don't invite questions at the end, but thank you so much indeed for what was a a superb talk on trust and empathy, all that we can aspire to. Thank you very much indeed, Professor.